Obviously, thank you to everybody for taking time to show up at this special Board of Selectmen meeting. Let's kick things off with a pledge, if you would. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Our first item up is the Riverfield School Building Committee. Motion for here is to consider and act upon the establishment of the Riverfield School Building Committee and to approve a charge for this committee. May I have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second. Mr. Cohen? He was here.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Hey. It's been a while since you first initiated this project with us. Would you be able to give us a bit of an update? And I know you've given us some documentation and paperwork over time. If you could kind of lay this out for us. Can you get up there? You need to move the chair.
I'm Tom Cullen, Director of Operations with Central Office. And I thank you for this time to be able to talk to you about this project. Riverfield Elementary School project is a project that came out of the Board of Ed approved long-term facility plan. It's a school that has a growing enrollment. The existing building cannot accommodate the amount of students and the enrollment that's at that school. Hence, we have 5 portable classrooms in the back. MGT of America was hired 2 years ago to do a study and a report about the enrollment in Fairfield. It also included a second part that was about the capacity deficiencies in the schools. So there's also a list of capacity deficiencies. So the district brought forward to the Board of Ed a request last year around June of 2011, a letter that we sent to the first selectman requesting that a building committee get formed to review and investigate the need for a renovation and an upgrade at Riverfield Elementary School. Specifically to deal with the elimination of the 5 portable classrooms that are aging and the capacity deficiencies throughout the building. We then worked on an educational specification that was very detailed, and we sent out a packet to the selectmen that included a lot of the information. The thing we did differently this time, the Board of Ed paid and hired a local architect, Philip Cerrone, who's very familiar with the elementary schools and has done in the past elementary school facility studies. We hired him to come in and sit with the principal and central office to start talking about what kind of ideas and where could we put an addition on this site. We had some ideas of our own, but we wanted some expertise, and also to look at some of the funding cost. Based on eliminating the portables and coming up with a 5 or 6 classroom addition, meeting some of the capacity deficiencies, we're in the ballpark of the $9, $10, $11 million number we were thinking we did internally. That was a great help. He's here tonight if you need to have any questions going in that direction, but he was able to identify 2 areas where an addition could go, would work well on the site and not interfere with the field or any of the planning and zoning issues or code issues. And it worked with the principal to identify some of the deficiencies where he has teachers doubled up in rooms and spaces he can't meet. And he came up with some drawings and sketches that worked with us, and then he went out and got a professional estimate to weigh against ours. So that was a little different than we normally have done in the past, where we hire someone up front. He's not the architect of record for the job, I want to state that, but he was hired by the Board of Ed to verify some of the numbers and some of the ideas we had moving forward. So I think that's about it. Is that good?
Yeah, if you could just have a couple clarification points. And again, thank you very much for the packet. And for those of you that weren't here last time when this was initially proposed to the Board of Selectmen, there were a number of questions that came up. Dr. Title and his team, including Mr. Cullen, have submitted a number of documents last fall and over the winter in terms of prepping for this. Just a couple questions, if my colleagues will permit me to kick things off. The Fairfield Public Schools enrollment, the pink sheet, that says Riverfield 419 students. Is that correct?
Correct.
Or is that the current population?
We have a new enrollment sheet that just came out. It might be off by 1 or 2, but it would be pretty close to that.
As they say, close enough for government work?
Yeah.
Is 419 the number of students there now, or when this renovation's done, the capacity of the school? And is 419 the capacity or just the population?
419 is the enrollment that's there right now. It's not the capacity of the existing building.
What's the capacity of the existing building?
Let's see if I have that here.
Mr. First Selectman, can I ask you where you got your pink sheet from? Because I don't seem to have a pink sheet. my
It
material.
should be in your packet.
It's in this packet.
I don't see anything pink in here.
You might have had a black and white copy, maybe?
Okay.
May I? In the packet that we received, there was, the MGT projections are actually on one of the other pieces of paper. Right here. That show the projections going out.
I have extra packets if you're
Is that it?
missing
That's
any
the
pieces.
419 that I'm referencing, that's the as well.
Okay, I'm just seeing everybody else have a pink one. I don't know whether this was handed out today or not, so.
No, and to answer your question, the capacity of the existing building without relocatable classrooms is 399.
Okay, and with the relocatable?
With the 5 relocatables, it is, well, we state it to be a 504 school as the ed spec reads. So elementary enrollment that we want to do in renovating the building and eliminating portables would be to reach a 504 status for the school building.
All right, just to clarify, what we're saying is there's 419 students that attend the school today, plus or minus a few. The capacity without portables is 399. What's the capacity with portables?
It would be 5 times 25 in a classroom is
125 on top,
125 on top of
525?
that. Yep.
Okay. And when we're done spending the approximate $10 million, what will the capacity of the school be at that point?
We want it to be a 504.
So we're going from 525 to 504. And what's the peak capacity? I mean, as I understood things, the population had gotten up over the current population, right? It had been higher than 419?
Yes, it had been significantly higher, but we have schools that are even over the 504 mark. But when we worked with MGT of America and some of our consultants, the goal in an elementary school is to try and get it to be a 504 school, and then you deal with the enrollment up or below that.
And when you're done with this renovation, the school will have everything it needs, all the classroom space, the core issues, everything else to handle 504.
Yes.
And then if I go on to, it's actually the next page in my handout, but draft copy with some thoughts on it, that's what I'm referring to. It says the total down here is $10,940,000 and change. Could you just step us through, if I add this up, it seems to come up to a lot more than $10 million. So I think I'm adding in things that perhaps shouldn't be here.
Right, if you look at towards the top, the building addition breakdown that the architect provided was on the 2 schemes. So a new addition A and new addition B. So you would only add one of those in as you add up all the other items
Okay, and
to the
they,
existing building upgrade.
which one was added in to get to the $10,940,000?
Let's see. I'm not sure if he went with the high one or not. It's Phil Cerrone, are you here? Do you know?
Honestly, I believe it was around the 4162 number.
Yeah, the larger number, to show them the largest amount.
So it's 4162 plus the 4864
Plus the
plus the
contingency.
1427 to get to the
Sunk
10.9.
cost. Correct. Plus plus the soft cost and miscellaneous.
All right, I think that helps me out for a start. Any questions from the board? Anything to
Before
start
you
with?
go on, if anyone needs it, we have a few extra packets. If you're short any of the paperwork or anything.
I think we did our best to include the packets for the board,
Okay.
both previous to this meeting and in the packets for this meeting. So I think that hopefully everybody has a copy of everything.
Okay.
Did you-
'Cause I
Kristen,
brought
did
some
you wanna
extras.
Start?
Just actually a follow-up question. I can't find in my paperwork where you had provided the MGT projections going forward. And it looks like at least for the next few years, it's relatively steady and then spiking in 7 or 8 years. Do you have those available today? I apologize that I can't locate them in my pile right now.
I don't have them with me if they're not in the packet, but we can certainly get those to you.
Yes, actually I did.
Yeah, I think the ed spec.
Page 8 in the ed spec.
Yeah, and it should identify the deficiencies. Correct. Yep, she's right. Thank you.
Kristen, anything else at this time?
No, it's not until, we're well under in terms of what we're looking at currently capacity-wise until 1920, according to this. So just noting that. The goal capacity, that is.
Mr. Walsh?
So the school currently has room for, correct me if I'm wrong, 524 students?
If you include the portables, and if you're looking just at students. The other issue that's probably not detailed here well, but in the MDT report, are the capacity deficiencies. So those are the deficiencies where we don't have enough storage rooms, we don't have enough copy rooms, teachers might be sharing rooms, as we talked about during the tour. 2 and 3 teachers are using one room and need to see students, so they take turns and have to move around. They have to go to the library sometimes and other spaces in the building, and especially for a lot of the special needs programs. So there's a lot of capacity deficiencies that aren't calculated in when you look at the enrollment. And that 524 number is with the 5 portable classrooms.
Okay. And what is the capacity currently, the design capacities for the core facilities?
399 is what the,
And that's what it's optimally made for? When that building
That's
was
when it was
designed, it was
designed.
made for 399 students?
correct.
Okay, because the all-purpose room that I took a tour in
Yeah.
was considerably smaller than any of the all-purpose rooms I've seen at other schools. For example, Sherman, for example, has an APR that, to me, on the naked eye, looks about 20% larger. And when that was designed, it was designed for like 357 students. So how do you justify the fact that the APR there is kind of designed for 399 when it's
Yeah.
significantly smaller than Sherman's, which was designed for a lot smaller people? So, I mean, what I'm looking for is apples-to-apples comparison.
Yeah, that's really hard to do because across the district, the 11 elementaries, we do look at the large places of assembly, we call them. So we look at the gymnasiums, they're all different sizes. They range from 1,700 square feet to 3,200 square feet. It's a very large range. The APRs do, the libraries do. Some of the newer elementary schools and even North Stratfield, the computer room is separate from the library. A lot of our other elementary schools, the computer room is in the library. So it's very difficult for me to answer you and tell you apples to apples why it's like that. But when the building was designed, it was designed for 399 students. And the architect at that time agreed that the APR and the gyms were large enough. But in fact, Riverfield's APR is small, the kitchen's small, it doesn't have 2 serving lines, it doesn't have enough storage for all the food and the capacity of the refrigerator and freezer, and the gym is doubled up. There's 2 classes at a time in there. to
So
try
when I
and meet
ask
the
you what
demand.
the design capacity is, you basically take the number of classrooms that were designed into that room.
Multiply by
You
the
figure
student
by
count.
number of students you want in there, and you're saying that's design capacity.
Correct.
So when I asked you about core facility size, you're not saying that we have a certain number of students in here, or a certain number of students going through for lunch, and each student should have a certain amount of square feet, and therefore the APR should be a certain size. You're just saying that the design of that APR, even if it was wrong by a previous architect, we're accepting that as the design capacity.
Yeah, because the large places assembly, you know, the lunchroom goes in waves. The principal sets the stage for how many students and how many classrooms are going to go through there. It could be 3 periods, 4 periods, 5 periods. They can double up and do one side and the second side. Just recently, we've been finding that the second serving line is working much better than a single serving line. And a lot of the old schools have the second serving line, but it's boarded up or covered up or the windows covered. And so years ago, there must have been 2 serving lines and they closed it down. Now we're reinstituting it. So it's hard to tell. With the gym classes, the same thing. Breaking down the periods in the program, and the principal can probably do a better job explaining this, but how they run how many kids through class, period, and gym that day and how many days a week is when he has to see when he needs to double up and have 2 classes in that gymnasium. So it's hard. With the large places of assembly, it's very hard to look across the district and say, can we get it apples to apples to meet even the newer schools, Burr and McKinley.
But at some point, it seems to me there should be some type of goal we set for all the schools so that there can be an apples-to-apples comparison. I mean, there shouldn't be, if we have a much smaller APR, it shouldn't seem to me that, you know, okay, well, we got to run 10 shifts through here because we have a much smaller space.
Correct, I agree.
Causing some kids to start eating at 10:30 in the morning and some to eat at 2 if you had to do something like that.
I agree, and one of the things we looked at with the architect, and we talked with several principals, was removing the stage that's in the APR. We talked with a lot of the principals, and we got strong feeling back that the stage actually worked better in the gymnasium. It was a much bigger space to hold larger places of assembly, and getting the stage out of the APR means we can expand that footprint 20, 25 feet by 30, and get 5 or 6 more tables of 8 kids in there, so we can expand those APRs, and that's a pretty inexpensive way to do it without knocking a lot of walls down and putting a big addition on the APR. The floor is there, and we just remove the stage, and we can expand it. So that worked well, and we got good feedback from the principals on that. So we're doing that at Sherman. We were looking to do that at Riverfield, and some of our other elementary schools when we get to them in the future.
Does Mr. Cerrone have a diagram of this, what he's basing his estimates on here for?
Yes, CS2.
Is it in our package? Because I didn't see it in the package.
It's not in your package, I have them on the board if you want to see it.
Yeah, I think we should see it. Thanks.
You have enough room?
Yeah, we'll make it work.
Can you walk us through?
I'm going to.
Okay, thank you.
As Tom said, we came up with 2 different plans. This is the existing building is here. If you're familiar with the building, the pod is down this end over here. The media center, the APR room, and the gymnasium in the back over here, the main entrance. Basically 2 double-loaded corridors, one in the front, one in the back. We looked at 2 different options. In this option here, what we did was we added an addition off of the APR, off of the pod. Basically took the pod and expanded it a little bit towards the back of the building and then filled in. This becomes an open courtyard where there's currently a play area over there. One of the issues is the way this site is set up is in the back of the building, you're probably familiar with all the ball fields. So we didn't want to go back too far. We really kind of used the back of the existing modular classrooms as our line that we wouldn't exceed. And going off to the north side, the grade slopes off pretty drastically over there, and then there's all the play areas that we wanted to try to not, impact too much. And then you start getting into parking and everything else over there. So in this plan, we focused the addition over here, For the most part, the existing building stays the way it is, but as Tom said, we were gonna take the stage out of the APR room so we get more space in the APR room, add a stage in the back of the gymnasium over here. And then, of course, we did include new ventilation, ceilings, lighting, and code upgrades for the whole building, a second serving line in the kitchen, and some, just general updating in the whole building, in both of the plans. In this plan here, we took the approach of keeping the pod pretty much the way it was on that end of the building, still doing all the core upgrades in the middle of the building. But basically what we did was we took where the existing modular classrooms are, and there's currently 3 here and then 2 adjacent to them. Basically take those down, create a string of classrooms there with a courtyard in the middle between the existing bank of classrooms and the new bank of classrooms, put another stage at the end of the gymnasium over there, and then a little bit of interior work here. Currently, some of these classrooms on the inside of the building are used for staff and for other things that we're going to now be able to put in here, because we not only gain the new classroom space that are in the modules, we capture that space, but we also put special ed, OTPT, gifted programs, staff room storage. So it's more than just, getting the extra classroom space. And when you say the capacity of the existing building, you kind of have to sway that a little bit by remembering that some of those classrooms aren't really used currently as classrooms.
And I count 6 classrooms on this. Is there 6 classroom addition on each one of them?
There's a 6 classroom addition on this one because I took one of the classrooms here and modified it into some other spaces, special ed, and the corridor space.
Okay.
So I lost 1 classroom in the building here.
Yeah.
In the other plan,
You did 5.
I did 5, right, very good. And understand, this is really, really schematic. I mean, we just, we were retained to kind of put something together so we could at least get an idea how many square foot this project would take to be able to put a budget on it that would be accurate to move forward. But a lot more work needs to go into designing the plan, and it might end up like one of these, it might end up a little bit different than one of these, but at least we're comfortable that we know in these numbers and in this square footage, we can accomplish what we're trying to accomplish.
And in this particular plan, it seems to flow a lot better than everything, because the other 5 new classrooms on the other plan all flow through the pod, which is
Right.
kind of an albatross. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah. But I think, Mr. Walsh, a
Yeah.
caution on that
Sure.
is the committee's going to go out and hire an architect to do this. This is a preliminary concept. I don't believe that this is a requirement, either one's a requirement to fit one of these 2.
That's correct.
So I think that the building committee would have the benefit of an architect to come back with a concept, certainly share this, but could develop something entirely different if that seemed a better fit based on their view of the specs and how they did that.
I guess the question is, why did we spend money on 2 different designs then?
So you spend money on, I'm going to answer the question for you if I can. Tom can step in whenever he wants, but the reason you spend money on these 2 designs was so that, again, we could have something that we'd be able to put accurate numbers on versus just saying, hey, we think we need 10,000 square feet of additional space, let's figure out how much it's going to cost. By doing this, at least we have an idea. This is about how many exterior walls we're going to have. This is about how much glass we're going to have. This is about how much ceiling we're going to have. So we had something to base some quantities on versus just saying, hey, we think it's going to cost $400 a square foot. I think in the whole scheme of what this whole project is, the amount of money that went into this, it's not a lot of money. That's why I'm trying to tell you, we just did a couple of quick schematics. We didn't spend a ton of time coming up with 20 different options and kind of really venting out some of these smaller details. But I think you need to spend something to get to the point of where you're going to have more accurate budgets.
And how much money did we spend on this?
I want to say somewhere around $5,000. We also wanted to know, Phil Cerrone is in town and knows a lot of the codes and regulations and planning and zoning, and want to make sure we met a lot of the setback lines and guidelines, and that we weren't going crazy looking at the whole site.
And at this point, it is a concept. We're not here today to approve a dollar amount or not.
Correct.
We're here to approve the charge and the people on the building committee. So there's a lot more development work to do by the committee overall. And again, getting back to a rough timeline, I think both addresses part of that. If this is approved today, we'd go to the RTM at the end of this month. You propose the building committee be selecting an architect, construction manager, commissioning agent, owner's rep if desired in May. In October, architect would develop the conceptual options. November, Board of Ed approval for the project. December, building committee selects design and seeks project funding. So we're almost a year away from seeking project funding. May 2013, the funding request is approved. June 2013, forms go to the Bureau of School Facilities. Architect completes designs by November of 2013. January 2014, the building committee, architect and manager seeks approval for land use and permits. February, architect proceeds with the completion of construction documents. April 2014, representative attends PCT meeting with Bureau of School Facilities. May 2014, construction manager and purchasing department advertise for bids. And hopefully done by September of 2015, substantial completions. So we're a ways away from even getting this project out to bid overall, but as pointed out, there's a lot of steps in the process, and I think this timeline at least is very helpful to me in terms of seeing what the steps are and what some of the appropriate deadlines might be.
Yes, and as you said, it'll go to the state for reimbursement. This project will qualify for the work we're doing.
Any further questions from the board at this time?
Yeah, I'd just like to hear from Mr. Cullen and Mr. Cerrone. Based on these numbers, you're estimating that this project, I just want to get confirmation on this because we've had some horrible numbers on other projections and other buildings in the past. You're looking at between a $10 and $11 million project, and you're both professionally feel confident in those numbers.
Yes, our original number out of our office was in the 9 million range, which is why we thought, we worked with Dr. Title, it was a good idea. We thought we'd bring in someone local that knows the Fairfield area and see if they could work with the principal and us, come up with a couple of schemes and see if we were in the ballpark. So we were very happy to see the numbers pretty close to ours.
Right, now,
I
if
think-
I could just add to that, as you know, we're talking about a project that's gonna get bid 3 years from now. Okay, this is based on today's economic climate. There needs to be an inflation factor put on top of it. Nobody knows what 3 years necessarily brings, but if you wanna build that project this year, you can build it for those numbers.
I think the other point that Mr. Walsh didn't ask, but I think was embedded in his question, if I can make that leap, is that with the amount of detail you brought here, if bids come in differently than that, it will be fairly easy to go back and see where the changes were and what the
Correct.
increases were over what we were anticipating at this point. So thank you for laying it out this well. Kristen, did you have a follow-up?
No, I think partly I was going to ask you and kind of point out your note at the top of this, is that you're working off of old floor plans of the existing building and not a lot of detailed information. So how, you're confident in this for
I'm very
today?
confident.
And you went out to professional estimators in addition, so it wasn't just you, it was
No, it
others?
wasn't. I reviewed the numbers after I had other people put them together and then juggled a few as I thought I needed to. But the comment really more has to do with the fact that some of the petitions shown on the existing plan might not be 100% accurate. We're confident that, especially on the new part, which is where the bulk of the numbers are, we have all of that right. And the square footage of the building, we're confident we have right. So when we started putting square foot numbers on what it's going to cost to heat and air condition the building, what it's going to cost for the sealants and things like that, those numbers will be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, we did not do a structural analysis of the roof to say, you know, with the new HVAC system we want to propose. That building's very unique. The existing ceilings in all the rooms are a metal pan. It makes the space above them a plenum of air, can flow right through the whole ceiling. So we want to rip that down and do mechanical means of fresh air. So we'll need to do a structural analysis of the roof to make sure it can hold the equipment and what the changes will be to pull that metal pan down. So as he said, anything existing in the building are the unknowns if we have to cut into slab and what we find and run into. But
That's actually, just to follow up, it seems that's always where the surprises are hidden for us, and the new construction is a little more straightforward. And so I wanted to actually ask you about the completed work projects related to the HVAC. The form that the piece of paper you gave us about the completed projects between 2000 and 2011 heating, ventilating, air conditioning, duct cleaning. So I'm assuming there's air conditioning currently in just, am I correct, in just the gymnasium portion, is that right? Or where
Yes.
exactly?
Yep,
is
the
just-
gymnasium, I don't think the library has it, I'm not sure, does it? The library and the gym.
Would the principal like to comment specifically?
Yes, I do.
Don't say your office, the library, gym, and your office.
Paul Tuesa, the principal at Riverfield. Currently, the air-conditioned sections of the building are the office area, the gymnasium, the library media center, and what we call the wing or the pod, where the 5 classrooms are at the end of Phil's diagram out there. So those spaces are currently air-conditioned.
So-
Thank you.
May I follow up?
Yep.
Just in terms of, back to that structural analysis with the roof issue, so there are some places already that have the ductwork in, and you're looking at...
Well, the air conditioning, but not fresh air. More importantly, we want to get fresh air into the building. Mechanical means of fresh air to meet the new regs under ASHRAE. So he might have some air conditioning that's coming in, but no fresh air. So when heating and cooling is not needed, we still want fresh air being poured into the building to meet the new ASHRAE standards. So we'll be looking at doing equipment that'll run through the whole building, and we'll feed fresh air on a regular basis, and then heat or cool from that point the temperature for the needs of the occupants. So a structural analysis, we found out with Sherman and with some other schools, we didn't realize that the roof structure wasn't designed strong enough or large enough years ago in the 50s and 60s to take rooftop equipment like newer buildings are today. So that's something we found out recently, and we're going to want to check that every school we go to do a renovation.
Any further?
Have we checked on that at all at the current school?
Not yet, we haven't.
But it's the same type of design, correct?
It could be, but it doesn't, not all the schools have the metal pan plenum system. And some are on steel beams, steel channels, steel joists, concrete slabs, so we really need to investigate and get a structural engineer involved.
We also think that the way the school's built is really a lot of the bearing is on the corridor walls. If we strategically place where these units go, then we can put them over bearing walls or over column lines. And so I think that's going to be a big key to it, is strategically placing the HVAC units in the right locations. That's going to really minimize any additional structural work.
Any further questions? Sure.
Mr. Cullen, has there been any analysis, at least rough, kind of similar to the rough numbers that you've done about what reimbursement percentages we'd be looking at based on some of the portions being brand new and some of them being upgrades?
The reimbursement rate for Fairfield is running about 25.6% for renovation.
Oh, renovations.
For renovations and new work. What we'll be looking at is the state will certainly claim ineligible things that they deem are maintenance. So anything that's existing that we're ripping out and replacing, they'll deem that that's just age and maintenance. But certainly the whole entire new addition will be covered under the reimbursement rate. We're hoping the mechanical system, because the building never had a mechanical system for the whole wing. Code updates will be included. Handicap items will be included in eligibility. So I think we'll have a good feeling that a very large percentage of the project will be covered by reimbursement.
Yep. Just a comment for everybody. We're talking about the current rules on school reimbursements. Given everything that's going on at the state level, and given it's going to be several years before we get to this, it's not impossible to believe the state may change the rules. We've seen that recently in one of our bridge projects where we're supposed to be 100% reimbursed, and the state, partway through the project, changed the rules to something less than that. So.
Correct.
Well, that was part of my point as well, is the 25% based on what we've actually received and have in hand, or based on what we've been promised by the state for past projects? We're still waiting.
It would be both. I mean, what we normally fill out with them, what they do is along the way, as they look at change orders in the project and as we ask for progress payments, they look at all the paperwork that comes from the contractor, and they deem certain pieces eligible and ineligible. But it's very, very close when we come down to the end.
And what is the reimbursement rate on new construction? So either the new addition or A or B?
It's the 25.6, I believe it is.
I think you said that was on
26.07 is the exact number. Right
And-
now, today.
Everything else, other than the new addition, you think they're going to count as just replacement of, or maintenance issues?
Well, usually when we're doing the larger projects, like a middle school auditorium seating, if we replace it, is deemed maintenance. Certain things like that, FF&E, when we get into the FF&E, they'll deem some of that maintenance and replacement rather than brand new, than if you were building a brand new
Right,
school.
but the HVAC, which is
Yeah, that's what I'm
budgeted
asking.
over $1 million, that should be reimbursable.
Yes,
At the 25.07?
yes,
And the new part of the
26.07.
gymnasium, or the gymnasium and the stage?
The addition onto the gymnasium should be,
That's new construction.
all the code updates, handicap, even some of the asbestos abatement should be.
And Mr. Walsh, I think as you and I both learned, Jim and I actually served on a school reimbursement kind of review committee for what we're doing back 6 years ago, 7 years
Something
ago?
like that, yeah.
We were both younger.
With me.
And there's, it's the school reimbursement process, as Mr. Collins is defining, it's not quite as black and white as you'd expect. It's not go down to say, you know, items A, B, and C, you get 100% for, kind of, so there's a little bit of negotiation around the edges on those.
Yeah.
And that causes some of the fluctuation in the reimbursement percentages, and that's rules of the game, for lack of a better term.
Yep, state's very strict with it. They follow everything by the book. That I can tell you.
Any other questions from the board?
Not at this point. I mean, certainly different level of questions when we're talking about funding, but for today,
Yeah, well, and again, we're here to approve the charge and the committee. Mr. Walsh, any questions?
I guess just to your point, just to you in regards to, if it's approved, this program will be booked in the waterfall as being kind of an approved project, or how is that going to work?
We'll put an allocation in for it at this point, and specifically, sitting down with, we basically plan out our debt service, so we can see the impact of projects over time. We put in what we call a waterfall chart, but it basically lays out our debt service and what we're planning to spend. We put big allocations in to kind of cover what we plan to spend, even though we don't know what projects are going to fill it up. So in case of the Board of Ed, we're planning at $5 million a year. When you take a $10 million project like this, spread that cost of that bonding out over 20 years, that would be about $500,000 a year of that $5 million allocation. So yes, we'd spread it in. Paul would put in a component or a factor for interest rates, and you saw the chart where we assume those. So that'll play out. And then based on when this is done and completed, do we believe this can get completed all in one summer, or is this going to be over a couple of summers?
The bulk of the addition will be, but we believe it over. We worked with Paul Hiller to do a 3-year plan.
Okay.
Seed money up front for around $500,000 to get things going, and architectural and studies and structural analysis. Then the bulk of it for that summer where we actually start, I think we figured $6 million, and then the following year $4 million to follow up.
And then Paul would layer that in as his best plan. The
Right.
goal is, again, when any bonding resolution comes through, to make sure we have a waterfall chart that's updated, shows the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM what the impact on our annual debt service projections would be. Does that help?
Yes, so there will be an allocation once we form the building committee. Okay. And we can, based on this timeline, that fits-
Actually, it may, some of it may be in there. We'll check with Paul to confirm what he's included in there so far. Because he sat down with the central office group, Tom and his team, to make sure that when we put that in, we had a reasonable expectation. Not to bring up past, but there's been some miscommunication between the Board of Selectmen and the capital plan and the central office in the past. So one of the goals this year, when we put together our capital plan in September and held our capital planning workshop, is say, okay, let's work with a real long-range plan that the Board of Ed has. Let's see if that fits within a capital plan. We turned out it could. We then looked at what the debt service and what that meant to the tax rates going forward, because we wanted to put into the waterfall chart and our debt service projections real numbers from a real plan. We didn't want to sit here and say, just arbitrarily reduce any of the Board of Ed numbers, and if we did need to reduce them, we want to go back and do that with a full knowledge and discussion of what that is and why, and what the limitations are. So when we're presenting to the Board of Finance, to the RTM, and to this board, those debt service numbers you look at can be done within the projects and the approvals we have.
That's the question I guess I have. I just want to make sure that based on this timing, that it all fits in,
Yep.
and that that I understand that the central administration and the Board of Education has made this their priority, and they want this project done now, and they understand what that's going to do to other projects coming down the line. So-
And again, Mr. Cullen, if you'll forgive me, if this project magically grew from 10 million to 20 million and we decided to still go ahead with it, then what would happen is that would potentially bump off other projects, but what the waterfall chart does is provide kind of a what-if scenario, so it shows us what the impact of that is, so the appropriate boards can make decisions on future projects as to what the impact of that is, whether we go forward anyway or we push some of those off to allow for keeping within our debt service targets. So you're absolutely right in terms of that's the waterfall chart ties the projects back to the debt service, so we make not only the correct functional decisions for what the school should be, but the correct financial decisions for what the town is signing up for. Any other questions at this time?
No.
All right. Any comments from the public? Okay. Ms. Iacona, if you would, and please, gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Not bad for an old Bassick football player.
Well, I didn't play football, and I wasn't even a cheerleader. Pamela Iacono, the chairman of the Board of Education, and I just want to thank you for finally putting this item on your agenda for approval. I was doing the math in my head 5 years ago that Mrs. McCarthy-Vahey and I and the late Ralph Boley took a tour through the building with Mr. Tueso and our PTA, where we were desperately trying to get somebody to pay attention to Riverfield and to have something happen there. So we've all been patiently waiting as parents, and we've been patiently waiting at the Board of Ed as our projects move through their process. And we are enthusiastic and hopeful that this will move through full funding and will actually become a reality. But I just want to say on behalf of the board, thank you for making this an agenda item, for putting together the charge and to assembling the building committee. And I hope that this makes its way through the entire process and that we will see a building built at Riverfield for 2015. Thank you.
Does somebody else raise their hand, if you would? Again, just state your name and address at the mic, if you would.
Dana Alder, 245 Taunton Road. Good afternoon, members of the Board of Selectmen. My name is Dana Alder. I am a Riverfield parent, and I also serve as the PTA president-elect of our school. As we begin the process of our school's extension and alteration, I ask for your continued support and efficiency with respect to our building project. In our current economic times, we are highly aware that the budget dollars are scarce and that the prioritization for efforts are required. We have confidence that our project is fair, necessary, reasonable, and equitable amongst the town's other projects. I, along with parents here this afternoon, as well as those who could not attend but forwarded letters of support, stand to portray our team effort approach in supporting this initiative to see our project to fruition. We understand the road ahead and are eager to work together. Thank you for your time.
Any other comments from the public? Thank you. May have done that a little bit out of sequence, but I think next up is to review the committee charge. There's a draft before us. This was modeled initially after the Stratford Building Committee to kind of learn what we could from there, and a couple items added towards the end on some things I guess I thought were appropriate. But any comments or additions or edits from the board? Kristen?
Comments, just in terms of, it's, I guess, the fourth paragraph, related to the RBC shall follow all practices outlined in town building committee manuals and the 2007 report issued by the Building Construction Review Committee. And one of the things that we've talked about is the owner's rep piece, which is specifically referenced in that 2007 report, as the first selectman has talked about. And I think we need to make sure that this is emphasized and understood by committee members. I don't know that it's necessary to articulate specifically that piece of it, as there are a number of important items in there. But also just to note that the Town Facilities Commission has been working to update some of those manuals and practices, and I guess my comment is that we need to be sure that we follow and learn from the lessons, apply the lessons that we've learned and from the mistakes that have been made in the past, and the things that have been done well in the past, and make sure we make use of those and not just note them in a charge and on a piece of paper. So that's my first comment.
Now, just a point well taken on that, and to the members of the, or candidates for the building committee that are here, the 2007 report was actually done right after the Tomlinson building renovation. So that report was put together by a group that meant to kind of take a cycle of learning and go back and look at the Tomlinson project. Some things went very well on that, some things didn't go so well on that, the budget being one of them, and say, what do we learn, how do we do it better, and how do we not repeat the mistakes of the past? So I think that 2007 report is definitely a learning document from that standpoint. Any other, or did you have some more to follow up?
I'll just follow up on that, the budget piece, I guess, again, to emphasize, though we're not saying this here, it's clear in terms of how we operate in town that funds are, only those funds that have been appropriated can be expended, and that is, may sound very self-explanatory, but I just, again, want to be saying that out loud on the record, that, you know, if funds do get approved at some point, that's how the process works. So just want to put that out there as well. I don't think it needs to be in the charge per se, because it's understood, but.
Mr. Walsh, any follow-up comments from you?
Sure. In regards to the charge itself, it says that there are going to be 7 to 9 members. I think that we should have it be 9 or more, 9 to 11. And one of the reasons is to address this report from the TBC SC that was done, specifically in the 3rd paragraph. They specifically say on page 5 that it should be more than 7 voting members. And I know in the past we've had problems getting quorums because of everyone's busy lives. People take new jobs, people are just busy. And I'm just wondering whether, I don't have any problem going forward with the chart. I'm just wondering whether we should change it to match the recommendation that was already supplied, because clearly they thought about it and thought it should be more than 7. So I guess I just want, before I make a motion, I just wanted to see, you know, what the thought process was. I know, Mike, you helped design the chart, so maybe you had some other reasoning that I don't know about.
I pulled it out of the Stratfield Building Committee.
Okay.
chart, and that was right from there. From a standpoint of getting up to 9, I think one of the questions was based on how the approval process goes.
Sure.
Based on looking at some holes to fill, it was certainly looked that we would expand this to 9. To keep this votable today, for your consideration, make it 7 to 11, and then certainly in the future, we can look at 9 to 11 as a more appropriate wording.
Well,
If you make it 9 to 11, it's not going to get approved today,
why is that?
because the committee won't get approved, because we only have 7 folks that have been nominated so far. And it's the committee that goes to the RTM, not the charge.
All right,
May I?
go ahead,
Yep.
Chris.
Just, and, yeah, I think that we want to follow the recommendations. I actually spent some time talking with a few different folks, one of whom was the chair of the TFC, some other members of building committees, and had thoughts on both sides of that issue from 7 to 9. 7 being a smaller working group actually could be easier, manageable in terms of having conversations around the table. The con side being that if you have subcommittees that are forming, 7 essentially allows you to have only 2 subcommittees, and if you need to have 3, it's harder to do so without people serving on more than one subcommittee. My thought is that if we leave this at 7, it certainly does allow it to move through today. I'm not opposed to having it go to higher than 9 members for that number. And again, based on my experience as an RTM member, what I found in approving committees is as the L&A subcommittee of the RTM looks at folks and says, you know, here's the balance of the committee, here's what we're looking for, here's what we see that we like, here's what we may not like, and it gives us some room there. So I think the 7 people that we have, I mean, I'm kind of jumping ahead to the next item, are a good mix, but I wouldn't really want to change it the 7 piece of this for today, so we can move this forward. But I am open, and I also did ask the town attorney, from a process standpoint, are we able to add members? And we are, so at a later point.
Moving the high side up to 11, I can certainly support. I don't mean to.
No, and I want to
disagree
move
with
it
that.
forward as well. It's just, I just have a hard time when we had a temporary building construction study committee. They spent obviously a lot of time putting together a report that's over 30 pages long. And one of their first recommendations is in regards to committee size, and they say it should be more than 7, that we should try to stick to that. I understand what Stratfield did, but I think we should probably get up to 9 rather quickly, just so that we could start sending a message to further future building committees next time we form one.
Well, yeah,
So
and-
I'm willing to amend it to 7 to 11, but, I want the minutes to suggest that we should probably, try to get to 9 quickly. Maybe by the next Board of Selectmen meeting, we approve a couple more people.
That
So-
sounds entirely reasonable. And
Okay.
and again, it's this board that both reviews this charge coming into this meeting and voting on it coming out. So we're kind of in control of that, so
Sure.
easy to do. Any other thoughts or comments from the board? Mr. Walsh, would you like to make a motion for your thought? or
Yes,
edit?
I'm going to make a motion to amend the charge, committee charge, in the 4th paragraph, to read that the RBC shall consist of not less than 7 and not more than 11 members.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. Any discussion on the amendment? Any comments from the public on the amendment and the amendment only? Back to the board. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So the charge now stands amended? All right. Any other comments on the charge?
Question.
Charge. Go ahead.
In terms of the process, getting the schematic, preparing the schematic drawings and the outline of specifications, Mr. Cullen referred actually to seed money. Actually, the documents we got used $250,000 as a number, and you said $500,000 today. And I know we're not approving that today, but in terms of, from a process standpoint, the authorization and the preparation of schematic drawings, should we anticipate that here in the charge as part of that and include that, or is that also, again, something that's understood as part of the work that the group will do? In the 3rd paragraph, would that be something to specifically add related to the preparation of schematic drawings? And this is just from talking with, again, another member. I'll read you the language that was potentially recommended by a member of a building committee. The RBC following the sentence that reads, the RBC shall organize their scope of work and estimate the costs and request appropriate funding. Would add, the RBC is hereby authorized to complete at least the preparation of schematic drawings and outline specifications for the project at Riverfield Elementary School. And just wanted to get a sense of
Yeah, how is
how that
that
fits.
different than the second sentence, which says, "The estimate of total project cost, schedule, and schematic design documents shall provide the basis for the request for project funding"?
I think it just more specifically lays it out. Just wondering if the sense of the need is there for that. In terms of process, I mean, my understanding is that no schematic drawings going forward are going to be done until the seed money is approved. Am I correct? on
Correct.
that? Okay.
And we're not,
So-
since we're not approving money with this charge, anything that requires money would have to come back to this board, the Board of Finance, and the RTM.
Okay. So let me ask this, if I may, through you to Mr. Cullen. What timeline do you anticipate, in our timeline here? I know, because we're kind of past what we have on that timeline that you had given us, so what's your hoped-for timeline in terms of seed money?
certainly with some of the recent projects we're doing, we're finding out that the seed money originally was just to get architectural engineering firm involved. There'd be an RFP go out from the town to hire a team to start that. But what we're finding out with a lot of recent projects is the structural analysis on the roof's going to need to be done. That'll be a third party. Hazardous material testing to get an idea of what's in the building is another third party. So when we even talked with Paul Hiller, we initially were saying probably only $250,000 will get a lot of that done, but to be on the safe side, we agreed maybe $500,000 will certainly cover all of that. It'll be a one-time request, and we'll get all the studies and information, an environmental firm involved, structural analysis involved, as well as the architect and engineer for the actual design. Timeline for that, we would want that to happen as quickly as the building committee could get formed to get started, because that does take time. The RFP process is usually 4 to 6 weeks. On a project like this, I would imagine a lot of the architectural firms and the third-party consultants will want to come out and see the site and have a walkthrough that'll add to the bidding process and get familiar with the building and the site. We don't have current drawings of the building that are real good. We'll need to get drawings from the town building department to share with all of those people. So there'll be a lot of time involved with that, and then their work is going to take time before they come back to the building committee. So certainly the seed money up front is very important to us to keep the project moving.
Okay. So, in essence, you want them to get up and running today, and then you'll be back as soon as possible for seed money, and then the schematic piece will go. So, thank you.
Correct.
Mr. Coleman, if I might, is that 500,000 included in the 10.9 number?
Yes.
That was, okay. And that would be found
It's
in
under the soft
costs?
costs? Yes.
Very good.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Cullen, while you're still up there, is there any requirement, in the chart it talks about how to incorporate green initiatives and capabilities within the design of an operation. Is there a current, based on this amount of this project, what is anticipated to be, is there a requirement that the state for reimbursement process requires us to hit a certain LEED standard?
Yes, they'd like us to look at certainly all green initiatives with the new addition and renovation work with the HVAC equipment and a lot of the code updates. But I'm glad you brought it up, because one of the things I would like to see in the charge would be something about the state reimbursement process. It's a very lengthy process. It's very detailed. There's an awful lot of paperwork that has to come from the project team through the building committee to central office to file on a timely basis. And it's a big part of the financial package that goes with the project. That would include any LEED certification we're looking at, any green initiatives, and certainly with the upgrade of the work we're going to do in that building. That'll be a step. I'm not sure it's required by the state because it's an addition. It's not a brand-new school building, but they certainly will look at that and grade it as we file for reimbursement with them.
I thought the state had a statute, and it might not be part of the reimbursement project.
But
I
it
thought
might
this-
not be, see if it's for renovations or new construction.
Yeah, that's the question,
Yeah.
I guess, is
Yeah, I have to
whether
find
the
out.
state, I thought, based on all municipal buildings, based on a certain level, I thought it was like 5 million or above, and
If I
Mr.
may-
Cerrone might be able to help you.
I believe my understanding is 2 million is LEED certified or equivalent, silver,
LEED silver, right?
or equivalent. But you don't have to go through, you don't have to get the LEED certificate necessarily.
Mhm.
We have to approve you at that level. I thought it was 2 million, but if you're wrong.
This would.
Okay, so that would...
And that's not difficult to meet.
So that would, basically what we're saying is the LEED silver requirement would extend to this project because of the anticipated cost being well over $2 million.
Correct. And I just wanted to add, that's not hard to meet. The silver program is, you don't have to do very much in the project to meet that.
By the time we do this project, the codes are gonna probably, if you just meet the code, you'll probably be at LEED silver by then anyway.
All right. And what would you like to see in the charge regarding the reimbursement process?
I didn't think about any wording. I just, when I read it, I was happy with it, except that it didn't mention anything about the reimbursement process. And it's such a big step with a project of this size. As I said, there's an awful lot of paperwork that has to go through. from the project team
Okay.
and building committee.
Yeah, and going back to our prior work, actually, Jim, some of the work we did on the reimbursement committee, if we're going to add something along those lines, it would seem that the, to reference that the building committee should make every effort to both maximize the school reimbursement possibilities and also realize that the timely reimbursement is an important part of the mission or charge of the committee.
Yeah.
Is that a fair?
Yeah, and they need to, track it and coordinate the reimbursement process, because I think one of the things we learned is that it wasn't really being done at any level. And
Yeah.
the building committee didn't seem to have that on their,
It wasn't on
Radar.
it wasn't part of the committee mission, for not to
Yes.
confuse that with charge. I think it really needs to be tracked by the finance department, because they're the folks both writing out the checks and seeing when the checks come in. And technically, again, as a recommendation that came out of our work, that may not be 100% followed at the moment, that any school reimbursement project would be reported back to the Board of Finance on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, I think what the first selectman just said a few minutes ago would be perfect. Just that the building committee would
Could
be...
you repeat that back?
Building committee
Yeah.
would seek maximum reimbursement.
Yeah, maximize the opportunity for state reimbursement and ensure timely processing of all state reimbursement paperwork requirements.
That would be great.
Is that,
You want me to say that
yes.
again?
But before we do that, so that we don't have to do multiple amendments, just for discussion right now, I also think that we should put something in there about the committee making sure that we make sure that we hit all LEED standards and any other statutory requirements in regards to environmental savings.
okay, why don't we just amend that second point? Instead of just saying the generic green, you want to put in leads, appropriate leads level?
Or statutory equivalents. Because, as Mr. Cerrone properly stated, if we change our statutes by that time, but, maybe LEED's standards won't be being followed at that point in time, but, but any other statutory requirements for energy savings.
Yeah, that was the reason for using the generic green and
Sure.
doing that, so that,
Yeah, but
happy to
I-
consider change. Sure, go ahead.
So rather than saying the appropriate, incorporate appropriate green initiatives, including but not limited to LEED silver standards. Does that address your concern?
My only problem is that paragraph starts off that the
Yeah,
committee
the
will
option.
consider as it evaluates and recommends. I mean, if there's a statutory requirement, maybe it would be handled best to say, follow all statutory requirements of the state of Connecticut in regards to building projects.
I think that charge says that earlier on, saying that it will follow all town,
We'll just say that. I don't remember seeing that.
yeah, it may not. The, I think the two issues, one, if it's a requirement, they're going to have to do it to get permits, everything else to be followed. It's not a requirement, we may be cautious in how we do that, because we may be buying off more costs than necessary based on someone's interpretation of that. And I guess the thought was to give the committee some flexibility if it was something that we desired but wasn't a requirement based on the cost of any specific issue. Specifically, it might work for 90% of the building, okay, without any additional cost, but to get the one last room or the one last place, that might be an exceedingly high cost issue to be green in that one area, over and above whatever was required to do that. And I don't know, I'll put it in there because I'm very concerned about making sure we're setting a good example as a town government, as a citizen of our town, in terms of following green initiatives and doing what we can. The caution would be just, to give the building committee some flexibility when they look at that. But,
Yeah, go ahead.
Just through you to Mr. Cerrone and perhaps Mr. Cullen as well. I remember sitting in this room with the Stratfield Building Committee, and to Mr. Cullen's point, it didn't seem that the committee needed to go through a lot of extra steps in order to meet that LEED silver certification. So what's your experience in terms of projects that we've done in the past 4 or 5 years, and how difficult that's been? And I guess I'm with Mr. Walsh in that I want to make sure we address this, but I want to see how important it is we put it in language.
my opinion, that the lowest LEED certification is very easy to meet, and they do that on purpose, so that you can get some qualification and reimbursement based on doing just a few things with equipment, energy efficiencies, windows, and things like that. It's when you start rising up to a gold level or platinum level that it becomes real difficult. You have to start doing solar, geothermal, and a lot of work that costs more money to the project.
Yeah, the thing I would caution you about is that lead has changed. There was original lead, then lead changed, and the amount of paperwork doubled. Lead could change again, and it could at some point become cumbersome to actually have to do lead. A lot of projects are doing lead equivalent that meet all the requirements, but they're not necessarily filling out all the forms that go with it. And you don't really know 3 years from now exactly what those standards are going to be. So I think you need to be a little bit generic in the wording of it, would be my opinion.
It is interesting that a green initiative would require more paperwork.
Isn't it? Well, they let you do it on the computer, so.
But there is whatever that's.
There's a
gonna be,
statutory requirement, for
Yeah.
sure.
Whatever the standard that we're going to be requested to do at
Right.
the time.
You're not
it's
gonna- I mean-
Statutory.
The bottom line is you're not going to have a choice on that. It's going to be, to get your reimbursement
Yep.
and to get the money, there's going to be certain standards you have to meet. There's no question about it.
And my concern is that an architect missing it, the building committee not having it on their radar, and also now is applying for reimbursement and them saying, well, you didn't meet this equivalent of some standard, whatever that standard may be, and instead of getting 26.07% back, you're now entitled to 19%.
We would know that early on. I mean, the state sets up the prep meeting to prep the architectural team with central office. Then they do a PCT meeting, so they're reviewing the drawings. They would tell you right up front, you know, you're going down the wrong path here, you're going to miss something, so.
Well, Tom, we've had a lot of meetings before on some of this, when the committee that me and Mr. Tetra were on, and there was lots of meetings then, and we blew our reimbursement except for special legislation. We almost didn't get reimbursed at all. And it was the reason why our committee was set up. So as
I
much as-
understand. I was
as
part
much
of
as-
that.
Yeah, as much as everyone says, don't worry about it, you know, we've seen it actually in this town. We almost missing major reimbursements on things because, you know, things weren't followed.
Just to move things along.
Sure.
Mr. Walsh, if you have a specific wording change or amendment, let's consider that and hopefully incorporate it, and then
Yes.
move on with the charge, because we've been here for about hour and 15 minutes already.
I would like to add, as part of the amendment that Kristen's already taken down, just a sentence saying that the committee will follow all statutory requirements in regards to any type of energy savings or green initiatives.
Do you want to use that to replace option 2, or is that would be a...
Option 2 is that they can consider doing that. I want to make it a requirement that they follow all statutory requirements.
Do you want to replace that line, or do you want to make that in addition to the line?
I'd like to make it an addition.
Okay, so there'll be these
And I
3
can-
items plus the amendment we talked about with school with the reimbursement, and this would be a 5th item listed under this point. Is that acceptable?
I'm not looking for it to be a bullet point under this because I'm not looking for them to consider it. I'm looking for this to be put into the, maybe like at the bottom of the second paragraph.
Okay, just last sentence, okay?
Yeah, yes.
Kristen, do you have the wording down on that?
No, I didn't. do
Mr.
that.
Walsh, could you try it again, please?
Jen, do you have it down?
The committee will follow all statutory requirements in regards to any energy savings or initiatives.
Yeah.
All right, and that would be added as a last sentence on paragraph 2.
Yes,
Is that okay?
yes.
All right. Any other discussion on that amendment? Do you want to, Kristen, you want to add in your, so we can do it all at once? The school reimbursement?
The language, yep, I'll pass this on to Jennifer, which would be an added 4th bullet under the committee will consider paragraph.
Mhm.
Maximizing the opportunity for state reimbursement and ensuring timely processing of all state reimbursement paperwork requirements. Not sure that fits very well there.
Jen,
Someone could second that.
I'll second that. So do we have both amendment, the joint amendment?
Yes.
Seconded? All right. Any further discussion on the amendments?
Well, I don't know whether you want to talk about it here. I have one other question in regards to the committee charge, and that's in regards to the appropriation process. Is there a possibility that they can expend more money than they've been appropriated?
Let's come back to that
Sure.
after these
That's
amendments,
fine.
if you would.
That's fine.
Any discussion from, or any comment from the public on the amendments?
Yeah, I believe when Jennifer read the wording from Mr. Walsh, the word green was left out with the word initiative. I think
Oh,
that's
yes,
a
you're
little-
right, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Any other public comment? Thank you. Back to the board. Are we ready to vote?
Yes,
All right, now it's just on the amendment.
yes.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we have a new charge before us as amended. Mr. Walsh, I think you had a follow-on comment.
Is there anything within the charge that if the committee is given an appropriation, that they do not expend more than their appropriation and could bind the town? Because say, for example, the seed money, they get approved, say, for example, for my example, $250,000, and they retain people and bind us to $275,000.
That should not be allowed to happen because they still have to work through our finance department and our purchasing department.
Mhm.
Right. And the guidelines, the appropriation, our purchasing department can't send out a PO or authorize something beyond that. Our finance department can't pay something beyond the authorization.
Okay. I was wondering whether it was covered in the second paragraph when we talked about our procurement standards and requirements.
It may be, but it's, the big safety net is our finance department and our purchasing department that control that from happening, because that's, the building committee doesn't get to set up their own business process. They don't get to set up their own policies. They don't get to decide, we're going to bond technology, even if the Board of Finance said we're not supposed to bond technology.
Okay, but if they signed on the question I have is, if they signed a contract with an architect, say they got seed money of $250,000.
Those contracts are signed by the town, not by the building committee.
Okay, I guess that's my
So they
question.
come back through purchasing, they come to the office of the first selectman and have to be signed at that point.
Okay, that's my question, because the last sentence in paragraph 2 says, "The RBC shall retain a construction manager to facilitate and accomplish the necessary renovations." So the RBC is going to just choose who the vendor is, but the RBC will never sign a contract.
Correct.
Okay. That's, I was just concerned, because it says they will retain, so I wanted to make sure that they weren't signing the contract. Okay. Kristen has a question.
That's what I started with in the first place. For example, as the building committee is closing out and there are change orders, I think that was my point, is we need to make sure that isn't happening, and what you're saying is there is a process in place, and that the building committee will work closely with the purchasing department and the finance department as well.
Yes,
to
and
make
again,
sure.
once the contract is signed, the change order process is within the building committee. Right, they will authorize change orders, as they should. I mean, they're on the site, they're reviewing those. But they have to work within the budgets and the appropriations that we gave them. As we found with Sherman School, a more recent example where we had a very tight budget and had to go back and eliminate things, and as we were looking at options, had to identify options that would both meet the overall goal, but the individual goals of what could meet within the FEMA zone and what couldn't. I think again, at least it's fresh in my mind, we certainly did run in, come close to the fine line of that during the Tomlinson project, where work was authorized up to and right at that limit, and certainly we didn't manage that as well as we could have in going through that. But I think since then, as I understand it, most of the projects that I'm aware of have done a good job of that. And I think one of the silver linings in some of our recent experiences, folks are well aware of the fact that we should not spend past our authorization, make sure that we manage projects so we can see that coming, and as soon as we know there is a overall project budget issue, that we raise that to the appropriate levels.
All right. Can I just ask legally to the assistant town attorney, what would happen if they sign change orders, and those change orders, if they sign the change order? Because the town's not signing the change order, right?
Right.
But if the building committee signed a change order, and that change order brought it above the appropriation, would the town be liable for that change order? Or would that be void because it didn't get approved by the town, or didn't get approved by the finance department?
Yes, please.
Ms. Ewing's raising her hand unless she's gotten her law degree in the last
Yeah.
couple of days.
Yeah. Mr. Walsh, if you would,
She does
one
have-
at a time.
Ms. Ewing has a great deal of experience with building committees, and probably more with building committees than I do. I've only been on one, and I haven't volunteered for any other since.
Don't say that.
I would be inclined to think that, admittedly, we'd be in between a rock and a hard place, but having a contract in place that says that we will pay our bills, it would be hard not to have to pay it. But the committee would be in violation of our town charter, which says that no money can be spent in excess of the amount appropriated.
Yeah, I think at some point, to pick another analogy,
Yeah.
there are two levels of that. One is to ensure that the committee doesn't run off and decide to put in a swimming pool as part of this renovation project if it's over and above what we're talking about. The second level, and I'm going to pick on the most recent oil tank spill issue, is that, we're obligated, that wasn't part of the project, that's certainly over budget, but it did bring to the focal point that, in fact, as soon as that was identified, it had to come back to the appropriate boards. We had to determine how we would fund that in the short term and realize that that has been something we updated. So it keeps the reporting clear when something happens that says the project's going to go over budget. If that's, in this case, an environmental issue, we'd originally planned on approximately $100,000. The total tab is going to be over $300,000 with the cleanup in place. But everybody's been informed of that, and once the final number is known, it'll go back for final approval. So I think there are two levels of that kind of going over. Some is a potential environmental issue that we had no call over, but certainly had to go back and be reported. They couldn't do that on their own. The other case is managing it, so if there's any normal operating issue that brings it that far, that it's managed to stay within the budget.
And I think that that's right. It's more, I think, of a management problem. When you pose it as a contract problem, yes, it's a real problem of conflict. I think what you have to do is have the proper management procedures in place so that someone is overlooking the change orders and can project what the likely change orders are going to be so they don't go over. Does that
And
sound
ideally-
correct?
Ideally, our plans would be just so spot on, we wouldn't have any change orders, right?
Yeah.
It would be the first project in history to have that
Absolutely.
experience.
Ms. Ewing, do you have something to add?
I really couldn't hear what she said, so I guess I have something. This situation that you're talking about probably would not happen, because even if the building committee did approve to spend more money than they had, Twig Holland, who is our purchasing director, and Mr. Tetro, the first selectman, have to sign off on that. And Twig would say to him, "I'm not signing this, we can't, we don't have the money." This actually happened once, and we were able to transfer money from two other projects. I'm speaking now of the Tomlinson project. So we do not spend more money than we have, because we cannot spend more money than we have. So you don't really have to write it anywhere, it just can't happen, and it won't.
Okay, so the change orders will also be signed by you, Mike, and by the purchasing director. So there's going to be a three-step process in any change orders. It's going to be signed by the building committee, you, and Twig Holland.
I think the change orders may in fact come back to the first selectman. Forgive me, it's another, it's my rookie year, guys. I believe they do come back through that, but I think they come back after the fact. So the work has already been authorized and in most cases performed by the time that a stack of change orders comes back to the first selectman. It's not an advance approval. So I think more to Ms. Ewing's point, that the financial reporting system should be identifying, if you will, the normal course of work in terms of how we're doing actual versus budget. And that's what we should be projecting out, much like we did, forgive me, on the Metro Center. We sat here and said, okay, based on our projections, we're not going to finish on time. We need to go back for additional authorization to spend before we got to that point. The other piece is that from a standpoint of issuing POs, the purchasing department isn't going to issue something that goes beyond what's been authorized to spend at this point.
Okay. but we'd still be held liable for it possibly. Okay,
Yes, we could.
okay.
Yes, we could.
Now, I have to deal in absolutes, and in my legal work that I do, this issue happens all the time, and people sign purchase orders, and then they claim that they didn't have the work, didn't know the work was being done, or I didn't know that I'd signed that, or, I didn't know that my husband had signed that, and I didn't authorize that work to be done. So it generally is contract law that if you sign the purchase order, the change order, that you want a change done on your contract, well, now your contract has changed. So it just seems like there's a potential, but it's something I guess we have to live with.
There certainly is.
Okay.
It just,
It's one of the reasons why I started with it, because I wanted to drive the point home, and I think it's appropriate to have it come back.
folks, it's 5:30, and we've been here for an hour and a half.
Yep,
So
one other question.
please go ahead. I'm
Um,
sure it's,
It's related to the last two, well, now the second and third bullets under the last paragraph, how to incorporate the appropriate green initiatives, and then also how to incorporate time-tested options. Just looking for a little clarification on that, just because sometimes the green initiatives tend to be a little more innovative and maybe not as time-tested, and I think if there's a way we can kind of clarify what we're trying to get to with the time-tested options.
okay. If it shortens the discussion, I'm happy to eliminate both of them. Simply put, the green initiative is what it is. It was to do what we can to be a good citizen and provide for meeting whatever green standards are appropriate at the time this is going through. The last one was to try and get away from any state-of-the-art design. I think that we certainly have gone through that with Burr Elementary. I think we've gone through it with Roger Ludlow Middle School. Putting boilers on the second floor of things doesn't always make as much sense. Designing large glass windows and then realizing it's hard to cool the building after based on the sun is difficult to fathom, and putting cedar siding on the outside of a building, not realizing that it has to be maintained. We're going to need scaffolding to do that, and the topography of the school makes that very expensive to do, so we keep cutting it from the budget, are kind of some of the things I'd like to stay away from in the future. I didn't know how to say that any other way than the idea is a 10-year-old doesn't care if the school wins awards. Let's design something that's functional. I grew up in this town. Actually, found out recently that Mr. Walsh and I went to the same elementary school. At different times, he's older than I am. Or I stayed back a lot, one of those. But, you walk into Holland Hill, you walk into Mill Hill, you walk into Riverfield, you walk into Sherman, you'll see a lot of similarities in how they were designed. Functionally, they work. We knew what it was, how it was, we knew how to build it, we knew what the costs were, we knew how it was maintained. Once we solved the problems, we shouldn't go back and create something we don't know how to build and isn't, and I use the term time-tested, that may not be technical, but something that doesn't have enough real-world experience out there to fit in with all that. So that's all I was trying to say.
And I don't need an amendment, I just wanted it clarified so that there was an understanding that the green initiatives are possible and time-tested. Another way of saying that is sometimes we women will say function over fashion is I think part of what you're getting to. So I just wanted a little bit of conversation so that it was understood what was meant by that. And I'm very much in support of that bullet, both of them.
In the interest of time, Board, any other questions on this or things that we need to incorporate at this point?
I don't have anything, but I'm also not going to be limited by time. We were all elected to represent the constituents we were elected by, and if we get a better document out of this, I'm not going to be limited by time. And I know you've mentioned it twice so far, but I just want to go forward and be clear that all of us should be able to ask the questions that we should be permissible to ask. And, I just want to be clear about that going forward. So,
Mr. Walsh, you're absolutely correct, and I was just trying to be sensitive to our audience.
I'm trying to be sensitive too, but I'd like to just get everything answered to my satisfaction. So, thank you.
Any more discussion?
Not for me. Thank you.
Any comments from the public on the charge as amended? All right, back to the board. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Jen, do you have those amendments down?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Next up, to hear, consider, and act upon the following appointments to Riverfield School Building Committee. And I'm going to read it as it was initially handed out. Paul Cheek, Dan Graziotti, thank you. Christine Messina, Tom Quinn, Lawrence Ratner, Maureen Sawyer, thank you. And Scott Thompson. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right. We do have one change in this, so I'd like to make an amendment so we do this. Paul Cheek has been withdrawn, and in his place, Mr. John Schaefer has agreed to be nominated. Can I have a motion to make that change?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. So the stands before us, 7 members with the obvious intent to increase this to 9 to 11 as soon as appropriate.
Yes.
All right, any discussion?
I just want to make, Mr. Graziati, you registered? Okay, I just, this is just a requirement, so I just want to make sure. Great, yes. Excellent, great. Excellent.
Any other discussion?
No, I'd just like to thank all the members for agreeing to volunteer to work. It's hard to be on a building committee. It's a lot of hours.
Don't
away
tell
from
them
your
that
family.
Oh, yeah.
We haven't signed yet, Jim.
And, you know, the town will be indebted to you all for agreeing to do this work. And I appreciate you for all stepping up.
Any comments from the public? Mr. Becker?
Thank you, David Becker, District 1, RTM. The only thing would be, say, if I've got a regular Board of Selectmen meeting next week, you would miss one of the 2 sets of committee meetings, but if possible, if those 2 additional members could be brought forward for that meeting so that the committee can be approved as a whole at our next RTM meeting. You know, obviously, I believe you have some applications. This may not be possible, but if you can make any effort to do that so that they can all start off together versus waiting even one cycle, which would push it all the way until the end of March for RTM approval. And following some of these committees, especially with the early work and a lot of the details that were discussed today, really a lot of that lies in the very start of their work. So if you could try to do that, that would be, I think, very helpful for everybody involved. Thank you.
Mr. Becker will make every effort. Any other public comment? Back to the board.
I actually was going to address that issue in my comments, and just because the meeting is next week, it would mean the agenda generally gets published Friday. So I think that there will, I'm sure, by the first selectman, be every effort, and we'll do what we can. But I think the important thing here, and this relates to all the members of the committee, is to have the right mix and balance of people. And I want to thank all of the committee, potential committee members awaiting RTM approval. I've spent time talking with each, and I think it's really a great mix of experience from construction, people who speak the language, people in IT. We have folks who are in contract law, financial auditing, and just a really great mix of experience here, and I think that that's important. I'm glad to see that so many of you are here, and I wonder if we could actually have them.
Ms. McCarthy, that would be my intent after we vote and they're official.
Okay. I just want to just say again, as you have listened, those who are potential members have listened to this conversation, that the process starts out on the right foot. So hearing what we've talked about, it's great. You can pass along to those who aren't here, assuming their approval as well. So thank you for being here and for being willing to serve. It is a big commitment. I think it's better to be honest.
Thank you. And right before we vote, just, you know, it was a pleasure talking to each of you. It's great to look at the resumes, the balance. I think it well represents good balance from our community, and that's really what we're trying to do overall. I think we'll work just as hard on filling out the remainder slots to make sure we continue that balance, and everybody coming on adds a different perspective that overall helps the project. We also, assuming all goes on track, put together a bit of an orientation program to orient the committee to how we do work, who the players are in town, make sure you know the resources that are available, as well as make sure we put the resources, as has been mentioned in some of the reports, at your disposal. We'll also cover things, everything from Robert's Rules to FOI, so everybody is in sync in terms of how a committee functions, what the roles and responsibilities are, and the support you get from the town. And again, thank each of you for volunteering to help. Are we ready to vote at this time?
Yes.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So we have Mr. John Schaefer. John, are you here? You could stand up. Dan Grazadeh. Dan, I'm going to have to work on that name, I'm sorry. Christine Messina. All right, Tom Quinn. Lawrence Ratner. Maureen Sawyer. And Scott Thompson. All right, great. Congratulations to all of you. Thank you. With that, and because this is a special meeting, there is no new business that can come before us. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Congratulations. Thank you all for coming.